Hey everybody, welcome back. It's been a while since I made my last video. I thought I'd start by sharing some process work for a beach scene. And I was inspired by looking at a few Etherington Brother tutorials, and I'll put a link to that in the description. You know, when I'm looking for something to draw, it's always great to look at other artists and other tutorials just to go ahead and get that spark of imagination to go ahead and kill art block. So here I'm just using a custom brush that I've created within Photoshop, and I'm just starting out with just drawing a simple hut with some stairs, nothing too fancy. And as I work through this, I'm thinking about composition, I'm thinking about focal point, and I don't know exactly what I'm going to be creating that's going to comprise the rest of the composition at this phase. I'm just kind of putting my feelers out and getting warmed up. In a lot of my environmental drawings, you'll see me overlap objects. Overlapping objects creates depth. Now I'm establishing a horizon line, and I'm doing that by creating the water. When in doubt, draw rocks. I thought I'd go ahead and throw in a small rock in the water too. Now I'm adding black fills just to go ahead and give some additional depth to the scene. It also grounds your objects and kind of creates some visual separation between the objects that are in your environment. Of course, as I've mentioned in many of my videos, I prefer to do my initial drawings in red. In some cases I'll go back and ink. In this particular case, this is just more of a warm-up sketch this evening, so I'm not taking it too seriously, and I'm just trying to clean things up as I go along, and that's okay. So I'm thinking about material. I definitely want this little hut to be the focal point, which means the place that I want people to actually look at in the composition. And what I'm doing is I'm creating leading lines. The stairs, the smoke, the rocks are all taking us directly to this main building. And so leading lines plays a very large role in planning your composition. So at this stage, I'm just kind of thinking about what else I can add. So I thought I'd put another little hut. I'm putting this hut in the foreground to create some additional depth. It has a bigger door, so we can infer that this hut is actually closer to the viewer compared to the main hut that I started drawing. When I ink, I'm thinking about texture, so you'll see how I highlighted those windows. I just put a thick line. I've talked about my brush settings. This is a new brush that I've created, and let me know in the comments below if you want me to show you how I created this brush. It's pretty easy, but I really like it, and it seems to be my go-to. So if there's any interest, just drop me a comment and just give me some feedback on that. So I'm throwing some shrubbery and some bushes, just some organic vegetation to go ahead and break up all of the rocks. I've set my brush to really account for pressure sensitivity, so I'm able to get thin and thick lines using the same brush. In some brushes, you may have to go ahead and use the bracket key to make the brush larger or smaller. I did not have to do that so much with this particular composition. As I've explained in my previous videos, I prefer using the lasso tool for cutting or erasing, even when I traditionally ink. It's very easy for me to switch to that as opposed to turning the stylus upside down to erase. Now I'm drawing some trees. Thinking about the texture. This video is sped up twice, just so I can spend some time discussing the techniques that I'm using here. It's important to go ahead and get a sense of scale, so I'm putting some palms in the background. So you always want to think about foreground, midground, and background. That will create some depth within your scene. And over here, I'm just going to put an object here to provide a sense of scale. I thought it might be kind of cute to put a dog bowl and a bone. Just something to kind of suggest, you know, how big things are with respect to one another. So we have to assume that this other hut is further away, and the distance between the bowl and the hut is pretty significant. I could have made the stairs smaller to go ahead and drive that home, but it's no big deal. So now I've just used the hue saturation tool, dropped the saturation of the red to black, and now I'm filling in a base color. And as I've shown in many of my other videos, what I like to do is use that base color to derive the other colors within my composition. So I start out with red. You don't have to start out with red, but I feel like I'm starting with a warm color because I want the scene to be warm, which is why I'm using red. And here I'm using the lasso tool to first establish the water. I'm taking the base color, duplicating it by hitting Command J, and then Command U to go ahead and change that. I find this to be very fast when I'm coloring. And then I'm also thinking about, at this stage, you know, some reflectivity so that the water looks like water. You'll notice as this video progresses that a lot of my selections are not super precise, and that's because I'm always selecting from the base layer and duplicating. And so the topmost color layer is the sky. So even if my selections are a little bit sloppy as they go towards the sky, it's not a big deal because that's going to be hidden by the sky view. And you have to consider if the work is going to be seen, you know, if the process is going to be seen by other folks or not. Usually 9 times out of 10, most of my process work is not shown. But in those rare occasions, it's like if I was designing something where I do want to go ahead and articulate process, I'll be a little bit, you know, more precise. But this is just me working on something for my own fun. I'm not taking it too seriously. Here I'm just extracting some color out and revealing the light values. Making a new layer, I'm going to go ahead and add some white trim around this window. And I'll also go in and add some highlights. You might see that later on. Always think about how an environment suggests something about the people that live within the environment. Obviously these little huts are kind of beaten up. One maybe looks a little bit nicer than the other. But, you know, think about the people that live in that space, or the creatures, or whoever, you know, is in that space. But knowing your selection tools in Photoshop or whatever digital drawing tool you have, I think is a game changer, because it allows you to really work at a much more efficient way. Not necessarily faster, but, you know, more efficient. And for me, it's like, if I can work more efficiently, if I can save more time, then I can get more done. Here I'm just adding some gray and revealing the gray for the little pipe. You'll see that I very rarely go to the color panel. I do go in the color panel, but I'm not going there every single time. And that to me is like, makes my process faster. And again, this is just how I work. I totally respect everyone else's decision to work the way they see fit, but maybe you might get something from the way I'm doing things. Adding to a selection, Shift adds to your selection when you're using the lasso tools. And that's helpful because if you want to have different items the same color, you can use Shift to add to your selection. You can use Alt or Option to delete from a selection. So those are really important keyboard shortcuts that I recommend getting familiar with. So I'm adding the highlights for those windows. Let's color the dog bowl and the dog bone. I'm keeping the bowl less saturated because I don't want the bowl to be the focal point. You don't always have to go realistic with your color choices. I mean, if this is more of a stylized background, it's not realistic, it's just got more of a cartoony vibe. Now I'm thinking about my complementary colors, my yellows and purples. As I color, I try to put each color on its own layer so I can modify it without having to affect the other colors that I've already put down. Shift, Command, Option, N. Or Shift, Control, Alt, N does that for you. Now I'm going to make a beach. And most of the colors, with the exception of the main hut that you see on the middle, most of the colors are not super duper vibrant. They're kind of more muted. And that again puts the focus on the main hut. What I'm saying is, your color choices should be deliberate. And this is something that I had to learn the hard way by making a lot of dumb mistakes. I'm doing a grayscale test just to check things out. And now I'm using the lasso tool to establish my shaded area. So I'm kind of implying a light source coming from the right hand side. So I'm holding down the Shift key and I'm duplicating the layer and using Control or Command U to make the hue darker. And so I'm putting some cast shadows. Not really going super crazy with that, but I will go back in and I will add some highlights. Here I'm using color lock to make the smoke fade a little bit into the background. When you're using any kind of atmospheric effect like smoke, you want it to look like smoke, so smoke is light, it's, you know, almost transparent. but putting a black outline just really draws a lot of attention to it. Here I'm going back in, adding highlights. I'll put that on the rock. Put it on the tree. I'm using the multiply here to just give a little bit of extra impact on the water, you know, have it transition from light to dark. And now I'm going to use some post-processing things. So I use a program called Graphic Writer, kind of helps me organize all of my content. So I'm using a texture here. And when I'm using my texture, I'm very deliberate about how I use it. I just don't plop the texture on there and use it everywhere. I make a selection. In this case, I'm making a selection for all the areas that contain objects, which is the inverse of the sky. And you can see that I'm going with the lasso tool and just getting rid of some of that texture, just so I can, you know, have more control over it. And now I'm going to go back in, and I like to use some of my watercolor backgrounds. You can get these from various sites that have textures. And what I like about this is it gives subtle gradients to all the objects, these watercolor textures. And then I'm just experimenting with the different layer styles. And you should too. Just go ahead and take a look and see what it looks like. So that's what I ended up with. So that's the final image. If you found this to be useful, please let me know. If you'd like to have me talk about another topic, I'm all ears. Just go ahead and type that in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.